All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So before we were kind of taking questions at the end because of the live stream audience, we wanted to pass the mic around and make sure they heard the questions too. No more live stream audience. And Chris has agreed to go rogue so we can ask questions whenever we want. Go ahead and throw them out there, and I'll be in the back. I'll come back and bring the mic up if you want to make sure everybody hears that question. But with that, let's upgrade some Spring apps with Chris Sterling.
Let's go. All right, everybody hear me okay? All right, thanks for having me. So what I'm going to be talking about today is Spring Application Advisor. So this is part of our Tanzu Spring offering. So if you are one of our customers who has access to Spring Enterprise, you can get this today. It went 1.0 in August here. And the idea behind it is that a lot of times resolving security vulnerabilities in your applications really is an upgrade away. We're finding that out more and more nowadays because of security scanning happening more prevalently within our organizations. So disclaimer slide. Again, pretty much everything I say today that hasn't already happened may or may not happen. So that's pretty much what the summary of this slide is. But I am going to talk about a few things that we have today and also where we're going a little bit. So one of the impacts of shifting left has been the fact that security teams are, like I said, scanning more often. And they're finding vulnerabilities in our applications. And many of us are using open source all the way down the stack. And of course, those open source libraries, including Spring, have to resolve some of those vulnerabilities. And you need to pick up those dependencies and be able to ensure that you're always up to date. Not only that, with all of these different open source projects, they can only maintain so many versions of backward compatibility over time. So they're moving ahead and then may not be patching those older versions of those open source projects. Now, those CVs are being identified, and that's impacting the application development teams, obviously. That's me, right? And all of a sudden, now I have to go and investigate what's going on with this CV and how is it impacting, or is it impacting, or am I going to try to ignore it in the future scans, or do we have to resolve something? Now, that happens in organizations across hundreds of teams sometimes. So everybody's looking at the same thing. If anybody looked at the Log4j impact, within a lot of the companies I talked to, they had hundreds of teams just looking at whether or not they were impacted. That means you're losing so much productivity in the organization. Now, because this is happening more often now, we understand that scanning is important and figuring out how to resolve those vulnerabilities has become very important. Now, engineering leadership can't even do their proper planning for what's going to be delivered when, from a business functionality point of view. So that's kind of that impact of shifting left. We are all having to figure out how to handle security, and not all of us are necessarily equipped to have those conversations about what does security entail? What are all the things I have to think about? It takes years of practice and learning before we get to that point. So what we do is we said, okay, we have a lot of customers who are on old versions of Spring. How many of you are on Spring Boot 2 at all in any of your applications? Does anybody have Spring Boot 2? Oh, that's actually not the usual. When I talk to a lot of customers, they have a lot of Spring Boot 2. In fact, I even have some customers with Spring Boot 1. And just for a background on me, I started in Spring at 0.7. Accidentally, just happened to be into TDD at the time. I was an XP person, extreme programming. And this is early 2000s, and I got into Spring. And what was interesting to me is I went to one of our customers, and they still had an application on an old version of Spring that I think I helped actually implement the application, and they no longer do active development on. So they still have this thing hanging around because it still provides value. But what we want to do is figure out how from here, where we are today, get you up to Spring Boot 3, but not only that, keep you going into the future and help those customers that we have today that are kind of stuck on Spring Boot 2, maybe they're making that transition from 2.7 to 3.0 isn't as simple as just running a couple scripts. We want to get them there. So The idea is to implement a continuous upgrade culture in your organization, figure out how to make sure that that's automated and that everybody has this practice in place. And my ultimate goal, from my perspective as a product manager, is to figure out how to make sure when the security team says, hey, we actually have a CVE impacting 100 teams, they don't actually go out to the 100 teams. They pretty much say, oh, there's already a build waiting for me that if I just go deploy that build of all those 100 apps, all of a sudden those CVEs are resolved. It was already waiting for me. It had been already upgraded. It had already been built. And all of a sudden, if I just deploy those, I don't even have to talk to the development teams. They've already taken care of it. That's my ultimate goal. So there's a lot of different tools out there that you might be using. Anybody using any of these tools out there? Dependabot, yeah. Okay, anybody using Open Rewrite? Okay, and Modern? All right, so we have at least one person using that, and a couple of them. So one of the things that they tend to be based on is a lot of open source recipes, and Dependabot really only upgrades your dependency itself. It doesn't necessarily know about your code that's using that dependency. And if you're doing any kind of minor or major updates to that dependency, it could break your code. You'll find that out after you try to merge it in. All of a sudden, things don't work. Maybe you have a feature branch that breaks. So what we try to do is figure out how can we be more holistic about this. We really like the idea of Open Rewrite, but it only covers about 19% of Spring project updates since boot 2.6. So that means that there's 81% gap in what it can cover and change in your code and your configurations. So what we want to do is add some commercial recipes that make it easier for you to get that update. So we actually have that in our Spring Enterprise repository, and you can get access to those commercial recipes and be able to upgrade more of your applications. We're trying to close that gap. In addition to that, we also found out from a lot of customers, they were doing big bang upgrades, and they were having a lot of troubles with that. There are a couple of different issues. If you're still under active development on the application, there was all these new language and language changes that you had to understand in order to continue active development after you make that big bang upgrade. And so there was a lot of learning. Not only that, many times it would break your application in weird ways that you didn't even know how that was possible. So a lot of times the troubleshooting periods were months. So instead of doing that, what we want to do is also make it incremental. How can we help you along the way, make it over multiple increments of delivery, and so you have a little bit more of an isolation of that change, and you can kind of understand it better, do pull requests or merge requests, depending upon your tool for Git that you're using, and be able to review that, learn, and also incrementally test as you go. So those are kind of the major things that we really wanted to focus on. So Spring Application Advisor really is that tool that you use. It's a CLI. You put into your continuous integration. We'll talk about how that works in just a moment. And it allows you to automate the process of upgrading and patching. And then also we're moving into the idea of recommendations on how to construct your application. You've heard of things like Spring Modulith. You've heard of how Spring Boot, our Spring developers at Broadcom, how we think those applications should be structured, how you use REST controllers, etc. Those are the things that we want to help you with, get everything back into kind of working order, good design, at least from our perspective on how we built Spring. And then on top of that, we also want to be able to help you with that incremental change and continuous upgrades and patching, auto patching. Now we're going to go for a spin on this in just a moment. So kind of what I'm going to walk through right now is I'm going to be more of a developer who's not in a continuous integration environment. I am just using it on my laptop. Now what I'm going to be doing is I actually have my source code that's using Maven and Gradle. In my case, I'm going to try out Gradle. And Spring Application Advisor is that CLI I'm going to use as a tool to figure out how to modify my code, do a couple of different upgrades. Secondarily to that, I am also interacting with what we call our Tanzu Spring server. It's where Application Advisor server is actually doing all of the analysis of your code It gets the SBOM along with some other additional information during the process of using the CLI. And then from there, it's able to give you an idea of here's your upgrade plan, here's the next step, and even process that next step. Okay. All right, let me go ahead and go over to demo. All right, so I have the the Tanzu Spring server running in the background here. It's just doing a lot of waiting on my Pet Clinic application. And I've got Pet Clinic. I really wish I had that dog adoption thing that was used by Josh in the last session. But what I'm going to do first is the first thing I'm going to do is do something called build config git with my advisor CLI. Actually, see if I can get that a little. All right. So build config git is going to actually go through my source code and figure out what my SBOM is. So that's the bill of materials that's built into my application, all the open source dependencies I have underneath the covers, any kind of dependencies for that matter. And then also it's going to get the JDK version and my build tool. So it's looking at my Maven and Gradle tools that I'm using in this application. I'm actually using the Gradle wrapper over here. And with that information is creating an SBOM. So if I go into the build config, target. I will see in here a little bit of information. You might, anybody who's done SBOMs before, you might understand the Cyclone DX format. It's one of the standards for how you format your SBOMs. And so the Cyclone DX is being used here. And within this information, let's go ahead and look for boot. You can actually get license information. It'll give you where the information is provided from. So from the Maven repository, we're using version 2.7.3 in this case. So you see this is an older application using Spring Boot 2. And all the way through, it's doing that for all of your dependencies. It's also doing that for your Java version and for your Maven information. Now, what I'm going to do here is I actually going to run the next command, which is publish. So I'm going to send this information over to the Tanzu Spring server so I can do the analysis. Once it's published there, I can get my upgrade plan. I get my upgrade plan, and it's going to tell me what are the steps I need to do in order to upgrade this application to the most recent version. So this first step here is going to actually implement that for framework 5.3 to 6. You know, it's pretty straightforward. Micrometer 1.9 to 1.10 and boot 2.7 to 3. That's the first step that we're going to apply. So then as a developer, I can actually say, okay, am I ready for that? Should I go ahead and make that change? I'm going to do it locally. And all I got to do is the apply command. And now it's going to go through and make all the changes to my code locally so I can figure out whether or not this was a good change or not. All right. While it's processing, are there any questions so far of what I'm showing? Yes. Let's see. Is this one? Whoa.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just curious what all you needed to run that Tanzu server. What
do you need to run the Tanzu CLI or the advisor CLI?
The local host that you're trying to hit there.
Yeah, so I'm going to go into that in a little bit, but you can download the CLI from our Spring Enterprise repository. So as soon as you get access to that, you can actually download it and then use it in all of your projects. Yeah. And we have different versions. We've actually built the CLI as kind of natively compiled, and therefore you run the one for your type of environment, your architecture, whether it be Linux or Mac or whatever it might be. Okay, so we've actually did an upgrade, and there's quite a few changes. All right. So one of the big changes that we were making is we went from 273 to 3017. One of the other big changes, which you would have seen here, except for I think I made the change locally already, is you went from Java 8 to Java 17. Okay. Now, obviously, if your organization hasn't made the jump to Java 11 or Java 17, you might not be able to make this change immediately and have it deployed into production, right? So you definitely want to check in your organization what is the currently supported Java version. For those that have a little more freedom and you can use whatever you want, this is great, right? You just go ahead and jump up to the most recent version. We make that configurable. So we can make it easy for you to change that to Java 11 as the default or whatever you want it to be. On top of that, we had a few other things. MySQL connector changed quite a bit between the two, so we got a new version of that. Jakarta. So this is something, if you saw the Netflix conversation on this, this is one of their biggest problems moving from 2 to 3, is that Jakarta had a big package change across all of their packages, all their libraries. And so we do that for you. We figure out all the things that you need to do in order to make that change. All right. Let's see what else made a change here. One of the other ones, let me see here. I got to remember which one had the required on it. There's actually some annotations that were changed. I believe we have some new pet information. Let's see here. The pet controller. It looks like I was using a different sample application, but there's actually different annotations that were changed, like required was changed, how you use it. These are the kind of things that would be automatically updated in your application. Now, with all those changes, one of the other things that I think is incredibly important is the ability for us to be able to see whether or not we made any impact. So one of the things that we also provide as part of Tanzu Spring is the Tanzu Platform Hub access. And so with this, your application is registered with the hub. You get some information like, sorry about that. You get information like vulnerability analytics. It'll tell you how many critical CVEs that you have in your application already today, in your SBOM. Also, it will tell you what your support periods are for the open source that you're using. In this case, we have a little bit of time before we're out of support, but it looks like up here in the findings, 33%, it'll decrease from 97% supported to 33% supported in next 12 months. So we're going to have a big reduction in the next 12 months of what's supported in my application. Okay. We try to give you that insight so that you can start making those plans early and make those moves. And obviously, if you start using Application Advisor, a lot of those things will go away. You'll always be in a supported mode. At least that's the hope. Okay. All right. Let's go back to the presentation for a moment. All right, so then from there, you can obviously create a pull request. So you can do that from your laptop, or we can start to integrate this into your continuous integration environment. And we even have a command within the Advisor CLI that'll automatically generate that pull request, even put some description information about what's being changed along the way. So what does that look like? Pretty much in your CI job, of course, you do your get pull event, which you probably already do today. The App Advisor generates the upgrade plan just using the CLI like we did today. And the nice thing about a lot of the continuous integration tools out there, they usually have a pre and post step that can be controlled more at an organizational level or within a big group of different CI jobs. So you could apply this across all of those CI jobs at once, or CI pipelines. Do the next upgrade step, run your tests, see if it's still okay. If it's okay, then generate the pull request. And then the team can review that. And I highly recommend, mostly on those big changes, the minor releases or major releases, that you go and take a look and figure out what's changed so that I can learn how to maybe maintain this app after we make this upgrade. So once it's reviewed, it gets back in the main, and obviously now it'll go through the next step. Okay. So if I was to look at our example, and we were to do the next step, and I was to do advisor build config git again. So now the code has been already changed. Now what it's going to do is go on to the next step, or it's going to figure out what the next steps are from where I am today. It should look a lot like what step 2 was in our original, because I haven't made any other feature changes since then. Okay. And once that's completed, now I can do my next apply changes, do that next step. There we got the JDK version. All right, and if I look at publish, and I ask the Tanzu Spring server, hey, what's my upgrade plan? There it is. Now it's going to take me from 3.0 to 3.1 in this case of Spring Boot. Okay. That's the same thing that goes on when you're doing it inside of your continuous integration environment. So create the build configuration, generates that SPON build turns information, build tools, publish the configuration, and then upgrade. Seems pretty straightforward, but a lot of times you have a lot of things in the way of doing that. So we'll talk about in a little bit some of the limitations and also where you might need to have to do some manual steps as well. Okay. But the idea is, how can we focus less on doing the upgrades? And also what's cool about this, I don't know, as a developer, I always wanted to be on the most recent version so I could take advantage of the cool stuff that was coming out. This is the one of the things I would hope that would be a kind of a benefit as someone who's using this tool. Now, how do you integrate it into things like GitHub Actions? You'll see here that you're actually able to put this into the reusable workflows, so that all of your teams could take advantage of it at once. So with this, you could actually have information about where to get your Git information, where to put it, Artifactory information. And we're going to talk pretty soon here about how to sync the artifacts into your own internal repository before you use them. So if you want to get access to the Advisor CLI or the commercial recipes or other things that are in there, you could do it from here. And then you actually apply using all the information. This is something that you can do in all of, if you're using GitHub Actions today. And then down here, you define the job hook. And once it's completed, how it moves on to the next step. Okay. And not only that, you can do the same thing in Jenkins. Jenkins allows the same kind of capability. Right up here, you have your workflow for the single repository, running the commands down here. And at scale, you can template all the pipelines in order for them to take advantage of this. Okay. And I showed you in the Tanzu Platform Hub, you can get a lot of information and insights about your application, including where the CVEs are living. So one of the things that I would expect from a security team or from your platform team is for them to be able to go through, once all the applications are registered with the hub, be able to say, okay, we know this vulnerability is impacting these applications. Okay, and the hope is that they also get an indicator here that says, oh, that application's using Application Advisor. Maybe I should go check if there's a new version. So this allows you to have a reduced impact on your development teams and the investigation they need to do. Okay. So kind of to reiterate, what are the reasons why you'd want to use Application Advisor? Of course, the automatic updates, being able to use the new Spring APIs, everything that's coming out that's cool. Incremental enhancements so that you don't have a big bang and potentially side effects with breaking changes to your code. Faster time to resolution of your CVEs. That's a big one on the security vulnerabilities list. May not be everybody's most interesting thing to do, but within organizations, it's a big deal for us to keep ahead of. And then enhanced operational efficiency. Okay, rather than firefighting all the time and investigating what's going on in my app, getting a new CVE every other week, I can actually focus on our business functionality. Okay. Now, like I said, you can actually use our commercial recipes directly. So if you already are using Open Rewrite, maybe you've already got that effort internally, definitely this is something that you can do using the Maven plugin right out of the box. You add our commercial recipes to your overall recipe list. Now, the one thing you don't get, though, is you don't get the incremental changes that we give. So we'll actually decide for you what the next step should be, which recipes you should try. You have to kind of figure that out a little bit by yourself. Now, and also you need to run this. You don't really have a CLI that you can template. You'd have to figure out how to do a lot of that yourself. And then one of the things from a design principles perspective that I really want to get into is a lot of the things that were done in the open source recipes are kind of designed on a way of focusing on the version bumps. And they don't delve as deep into all the code variations that you could possibly get into and configuration for that matter. And so one of the things that App Advisor does, we actually have the Spring team. That's our superpower, right? So with the Spring team, we're able to ask them, hey, what would you do in these situations? And we can bring that to the team. They can actually tell us exactly what are the steps that they would provide for every one of the projects. We have 50 plus projects that we have underneath Spring. And then not only that, App Advisor, like I said before, is orchestrating your upgrade steps. So it's actually figuring out from your code what is the right step to take. And sometimes it might not be a full upgrade of Spring Boot. It might actually be first, let's do a Java 17 update, then let's do this change to Spring Framework. So there's some things there. And then also it prevents invalid upgrades from happening. This is very important. So there's, Netflix also talked about preparation. What we found with a lot of organizations, getting prepared to do the upgrades is very important as well. Sometimes your app can't just be upgraded. There are things that might have been done in the code that over the years happened because they happened. And then, you can't quite make sense of it. And so you might have to do a little bit of work, and we actually will point out what we are seeing and tell you, here's something you should go track down. What is it that you should go look at? It's in this class. You should probably figure out how to make this more upgradable. Okay. Now, how do you get access? So this goes back to your original question. So we have the Spring Enterprise subscription, which is an artifact repository. This contains, first off, our long-term support releases. So if you're on like Spring Boot 2.7 or 3.0, we make security patches there on a regular basis, proactively. And that means that you could still stay on those older versions until you can figure out when to upgrade. So those are available there, but also we have quite a few other things. One of them obviously is the Application Advisor, the server, and the CLIs, along with Tanzu Config Server, Tanzu Service Registry, Tanzu Spring Cloud Gateway, which are all implementations with a lot of security, operational tools in them, additional features that you might not get just out of the box if you use the libraries. And then we also have local authorization server. So if you're familiar with Spring Authorization Server, it's available there as well. So there's a lot of things available in that repository. And if you get your administrator to go ahead and sync those artifacts, they just generate a token on our Broadcom support portal and use that token to authorize themselves to that information. And then from a developer point of view, I'm only pointed at this internal repository that's already synced the artifacts over. I can get my advisor CLI, I can get the server and get that up and running. Okay. Any questions? Yes. I think I lost. Did I take it back?
Okay.
All right, cool.
All right, so a question some of us might have, is there a free or open source sampling of Application Advisor that we could add on to Spring Boot or Spring?
Yeah, there is not an open source version. Although a lot of times what we'll do is if you contact us, we'll work with you and figure out a way to do a little POC so that you can check it out. Yeah. In fact, we also have a design partner program. Although we got to 1.0 now, we are still doing design partner program for some upcoming features we're putting in the next versions. One of them that's coming up is auto patching. Some of those things where really there isn't it's more of a Dependabot-like experience on top of what we already do. In addition to that, we're also doing a lot of customized recipes. So how can you do that in an easy way? You could do it today, but we want to make it simpler. Also, we found that some of our customers are even using Advisor for non-Spring workloads. Now, obviously, we don't provide any of that out of the box, but we want to make that easy as well, if you want to. Okay. Hopefully, I answered your question. Any other questions?
So you mentioned that in your example that if you were on Java 8, it would have upgraded to Java 17, correct? I was just curious because I was looking at some of the documentation for it online, and it said that the server portion had a requirement of having Java 17 already. So I was just wondering if you could follow up on that.
Yeah. So the actual server is a jar file you can run anywhere, and it does require Java 17. What we found so far, all of our customers have the ability to run 17. So we haven't found one yet that made us do something different than that. Do you have a situation where you couldn't run Java 17? Yeah. Yeah. More of the issues that they usually have around Java 17 is they have applications that are built on Java 8, and they, for whatever reasons in that particular environment, that stack, they can't just move from Java 8. Usually for security concerns or IT operations.
Other question?
All right. Okay, so that's how you can get access to it. I talked about this a little bit, but one of the things we do is we actually print out some information, like some things you should think about. What we found in a lot of organizations that they have built their own internal library around Spring Boot and Spring Framework. And that internal library is the thing that really consumes Spring. But in order for an application that is a consumer of that to make the upgrade, a lot of times that library has to be upgraded first. We can put that in here. Also, you can do your custom extensions here as well. You can do some modifications to configuration files and be able to say, here's my library, and here's how you get the new version. And so you can add your own recipes there. Okay. All right, thank you. Now, one thing I was going to ask, how much time do I have? Is anybody interested here? By raise of hands, I also have a demo of Governance Starter, which is it generates audit information for regulatory compliance. If there's anybody you're interested, he might be the only one that's here after this, but can I take a couple minutes for that?
Yeah, you got time.
All right, cool. I figured bonus material, I thought I might have a little bit of time. All right, so the Spring Governance Starter. This is also available in Spring Enterprise. You can get it it's a Spring Boot extension that you add to your dependency list. And the interesting thing here, I got my own shifting left slide for this. So compliance auditors, one thing that's interesting nowadays is that regulatory compliance has become more frequent. Obviously, all the data breaches recently has caused a lot of this to come up to the forefront. And so what we're finding is that application development teams are being impacted more often, like every year. And we had customers who were saying weeks and months that those teams were impacted just investigating and getting audit information into spreadsheets. So what we want to do is figure out how can we reduce that. Now, we can't get rid of all of it, but we can reduce it hopefully tremendously And so how it works is you add the library very simply to your dependency list. And this is going to now on your application, as long as you've enabled the actuators, it's going to create a new actuator called governance. It's going to generate out information, which I'm going to show you in just a moment. And that information is going to tell you whether or not your application is meeting 27 pre-configured rules. Okay, and those are all based on FIPS, PCI, NIST, CNSSI. I got to remember all the names, and IRS. There's quite a few of them. We're actually adding more. We'd be interested if anybody has any other ones that they're very interested in. But we found that PCI and FIPS were the biggest ones. And then what it does is actually looks at your application at Bootstrap, generates the audit information based upon your server port that you're exposing, all the server ports. So even if you have an actuator port, it'll show that as well, and figure out if you're using TLS or you're validating TLS, because maybe you're doing that outside of your application, but does the encryption go all the way to the app? Then client TLS, this is all the connections you're going outward. It's going to check all of those as well and make sure that you're enabled. One of the things it also checks is whether or not you're using the FIPS enabled bouncy castle implementation, because that's the only one that's really supported by the NIST standards. And then also we'll check your JDBC connections and also your identity provider connections. So if you're using single sign-on OpenID Connect, or you're doing LDAP, something like that, it will check all of those for you. And then it's going to generate a actuator endpoint, which I'm going to go ahead and show you right now. All right. Go ahead and run my little example app. This already has the dependency in it right there. I'm using version 1.1 in my applications. Oops. Oh boy, you're going to see me do something very fun. I got to get on my VPN really quick. And Dan knows how interesting this is. Of course. Never a demo is going to go past all of this. All right, well, I'm going to jump past that. All right, here we go. Okay, we have our application up and running. We're going to go ahead and go to localhost. And we're going to go to the governance endpoint. Am I running on 8080 or? Oh, 8443, that's right. Demo guys are not with me right now.
You may actually have to type HTTPS.
That would probably do it too, right? Hey, how about that? And then go past all of the blocks. It is really not happy with me. Do you have any ideas? All right. Well, I guess I won't be able to show you that, but huh? Oh, I do have it at the end of the video. You're right. Good point. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and go here. One of the things that it's doing is showing you some details about the security providers. The default one is at the top. Bouncy Castle FIPS is enabled. On top of that, it is also going down and showing you a little bit more information about tests that are passing or failing. In this case, we were showing a demo of actually a failing test. You'll see at the bottom, this was whether or not TLS was enabled on that app. In my app, it was enabled, so this would have passed successfully. In fact, in that particular mode, we won't allow your application to start up. By default, there's configuration to skip that and be able to allow it to start up so that you can do some testing. But the idea here is that actually by the standard, you shouldn't be able to start that application up in production. Okay. And then there's 27 other tests, and then we give results at the bottom. But it's all done at Bootstrap, gives you that audit information, and we roll this into Tanzu Platform Hub, and it goes alongside the infrastructure and the container image information as well, so that you can create reports and reduce, hopefully, the overhead on your development teams. Okay. Any questions on that then? All right. All right, there we go. You can all get this online. We have the docs available right there, Tanzu Spring documentation, and it will give you all the information about which rules are being applied. It's called the pre-configured out-of-the-box rules. And with that, I'm all finished. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.